Staff Sergeant Ju Park held her breath as the sky turned dark without warning. What had been a clear day in the northern mountains suddenly wasn't. Her squad had been on a simple training mission, nothing special. Now something felt wrong. The air felt heavy, strange, different. Ju looked down at her tactical screen. Numbers and readings jumped all over the place. This wasn't normal. Not at all. "Captain Han," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm getting strange readings." Captain Taehyun Han was already on alert. His eyes scanned the sky, then the trees around them. He raised his hand in a quick motion the entire squad understood. "Form up," he ordered. "Something's not right." The 5 soldiers moved into a defensive circle, backs to each other, weapons ready. They had trained for many threats, but none of them could have prepared for what happened next. A sound like thunder split the air. The hairs on Ju's arms stood up as electricity seemed to dance across her skin. Then came the light, bright white light pouring down from above, so bright it hurt to look at. Through squinted eyes, Ju saw them. Metal ships, smooth and silent, appearing out of nowhere. One second the sky was empty. The next it held at least 6 craft unlike anything she had ever seen. They moved without engines, without sound, surrounding the small squad in seconds. "Contact. Unknown aircraft," Corporal Minho Kim shouted, his voice cracking with alarm. Minho raised his rifle and prepared to fire. He never got the chance. A blue light shot from one of the ships, hitting him squarely in the chest. Ju watched in horror as her friend dropped to the ground like a stone. Training took over. Ju aimed and fired 3 quick shots at the nearest ship. Her bullets seemed to vanish before they hit anything. Then she felt it, a wave of energy washing over her body, starting at her head and moving down to her toes. Her muscles stopped working. Her gun fell from numb fingers. As Ju fell to the ground, she forced her eyes to stay open. Through blurry vision, she saw figures stepping out of the ships. They were tall, much taller than any human. They moved strangely, like their joints bent in extra places. Their skin seemed to shift colors in the sunlight. Then everything went black. The first thing Ju noticed when she woke up was the cold. Cold floor beneath her, cold air around her. She blinked, her eyes open slowly, ready to face whatever waited. She was in a cell. Not a cell like any prison on Earth, but a box made of some clear material, not glass, something stronger. The walls shimmered slightly when she moved closer to them. When she touched one wall with her fingertip, it felt solid but slightly warm. Ju took stock of herself. She still wore her uniform, but her weapons, equipment, and even her boots were gone. No visible injuries. No pain beyond a slight headache. Beyond her cell, she could see more clear boxes arranged in a large circular room. In each one was a member of her team. Captain Han paced in his cell, his face set in grim determination. Minho sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes closed in what looked like meditation. Sergeant Do-Yeon Lee stood perfectly still, watching everything. Private Subin Choi seemed to be testing his cell walls, pushing against them at different points. They were all alive. That was something. Between the cells moved creatures that made Ju's breath catch. Now that she could see them clearly, they were even stranger than her first glimpse had suggested. They stood at least 3 meters tall, with thin bodies and 4 arms instead of 2. Their legs bent backward at the knee, giving them an insect-like appearance. Most striking was their skin. It shifted colors constantly, like oil on water, showing patterns of blues, greens, and purples that seemed to communicate something. Their faces held large eyes with multiple facets, like those of a fly but larger. They had no visible nose, just small slits, and their mouths were simple lines that rarely moved even when they communicated with each other using clicking and humming sounds. Ju watched as 3 of the creatures moved from cell to cell, studying the humans inside. They carried no visible weapons, but small objects floated near them, following their movements like obedient pets. This was no random encounter. This was planned. These creatures, whatever they were, had come specifically for humans. And they had technology far beyond anything Jiwoo had ever seen. Instead of panicking, Jiwoo felt her military training kick in. Her mind cleared. She began to notice details. The creatures avoided bright lights in the room. They seemed to communicate not just with sounds, but with the color patterns on their skin. They moved fastest when all four arms worked together, suggesting they might be slower if forced to focus on different tasks. The floating devices never came close to the cell walls, suggesting some kind of interference. Every 15 minutes, by Jiwoo's count, the guards changed positions. Jiwoo began testing her cell carefully. The floor was the same material as the walls. No visible door. The aliens must have placed her inside before creating the full enclosure. The cell was just tall enough for her to stand and wide enough for her to lie down, but not much more. She looked across to Captain Han's cell and caught his eye. His slight nod told her he was doing the same assessment she was. They would find a way out. They had to. One of the aliens approached Jiwoo's cell, its skin flashing patterns of blue and green. It tilted its head as it studied her, and for a moment, Jiwoo felt like a bug under a microscope. The creature tapped something on one of the floating devices, and suddenly a voice filled her cell. "Specimen shows awareness and analytical capacity," said the voice, somehow translated into Korean. "Mark for extended study." Jiwoo kept her face neutral, but inside, her mind raced. They didn't know humans well enough to read their expressions. They didn't know that she understood they were talking about her. They didn't know that every piece of information they revealed was a potential weapon in her hands. These aliens had made their first mistake. They had captured Jiwoo Park and her team, but they had no idea what humans were capable of when trapped. And Jiwoo intended to show them, very soon. Jiwoo stood perfectly still as two aliens observed her through the transparent wall of her cell. One was much taller than the other, with skin that flashed deep purple patterns. The smaller one's skin rippled with gentle blue waves. The female displays higher cognitive function than the others, said a voice that somehow formed in Jiwoo's mind rather than reaching her ears. She hid her surprise at understanding their words. The taller alien moved its upper limbs across a floating panel of light. The panel changed colors and shapes in response to its touch. "Specimen 3 shows resilience beyond predicted parameters," the taller alien said. "Increase the difficulty." Jiwoo kept her face blank, but her mind raced. They were calling her Specimen 3. They were planning more tests, and somehow she was exceeding their expectations. Good. The next day, or what felt like a day, it was hard to track time in the unchanging light of her cell. The wall of Jiwoo's enclosure simply disappeared. 4 aliens waited outside, their skin patterns shifting rapidly in what she was beginning to recognize as excitement. When she didn't move, one of them made a gesture. A force pulled Jiwoo forward out of her cell. She could walk on her own, but if she tried to move in any direction except the one they wanted, the invisible force grew stronger. The aliens led her through curving hallways made of the same shimmering metal as her cell. The walls glowed softly, providing light without any visible lamps or fixtures. Jiwoo memorized every turn, every door, every change in the pattern of the floor. Left turn, 30 steps. Right turn, 50 steps, through a wide doorway that closed behind them. The room they entered was large and empty except for a small metal sphere in the center. The aliens released whatever force had been guiding Jiwoo and moved back against the walls. The sphere began to glow, and suddenly the room changed. Jiwoo found herself standing on what appeared to be a mountain trail, steeper and rockier than any she had climbed before. The air felt thin and cold in her lungs. "Run to the summit," the voice instructed in her mind. "You have limited time." Jiwoo didn't ask questions, she ran. The ground beneath her feet felt real despite knowing it couldn't be. The trail grew steeper, with loose rocks that slid under her feet. Her lungs burned from the thin air. Her legs ached. But she didn't stop. When she reached the summit, breathing hard and sweating, the mountain vanished. She was back in the empty room. Physical capabilities exceed baseline by 42%, one alien announced, its skin flashing bright green. Proceed to cognitive assessment. This pattern repeated for what must have been days. Physical challenges that pushed her body to its limits. Puzzles that grew increasingly complex. Scenarios designed to create fear, anger, or despair. In one test, Jiwoo found herself in what seemed to be a flooding chamber with no visible exit. In another, she had to navigate an invisible maze that delivered painful shocks when she made wrong turns. In yet another, she had to solve mathematical equations that rearranged themselves as she worked. Through each test, Jiwoo learned. She noticed the aliens used different skin patterns when pleased versus disappointed. She saw how the smaller ones deferred to the larger ones. She realized their technology responded not just to their touch, but to their thoughts. Most importantly, she noticed they always returned her to her cell using the same route, no matter which testing chamber they had used. There was a pattern to the ship's layout, a logic she could use. After what felt like the 10th day of testing, Jiwoo was brought to a new chamber. This one contained a three-dimensional maze made of glowing blue lines. The maze shifted and changed constantly, rearranging itself as she watched. Complete the Krivax maze, instructed the now familiar voice in her mind. Few species have succeeded. Jiwoo studied the pattern of changes, noticed they weren't random but followed a sequence. Then she stepped into the maze and began moving, not just reacting to the changes but anticipating them. When she reached the center in less than 10 minutes, the smaller alien who had been watching her tests regularly actually made a sound, a high-pitched chirp that seemed to express surprise. The human female has completed the Krivax maze in record time, the smaller alien said to its taller companion, faster than any previous subject from any world. The taller alien's skin darkened to almost black. An anomaly, it dismissed. These humans are primitive. Their world is young, their technology basic. They are merely specimens. Jiwoo kept her face neutral, but inside she felt a fierce pride. These aliens, with all their advanced technology, were underestimating humans. Underestimating her. That would be their mistake. During the next set of tests, Jiwoo was placed in what appeared to be an earth forest. It looked real in every detail. The trees, the sounds of birds, the smell of pine. But something felt wrong. Survive for 3 cycles, came the instruction. Jiwoo immediately set to work building shelter, finding water, identifying edible plants. But as she worked, she noticed strange details. The birds made sounds but never appeared. The plants grew in patterns too perfect to be natural. The sun moved across the sky too quickly. This wasn't just a test of survival skills. It was a test of observation. They wanted to see if she would notice the flaws in their simulation of Earth. Jiwoo smiled to herself as she gathered firewood. Each test revealed as much about them as it did about her. They didn't understand Earth well enough to recreate it perfectly. They didn't understand humans well enough to predict her responses. And every day, every test, she learned more about them. She learned they called themselves the One-Jin. She learned they considered themselves superior to all other life forms they had encountered. She learned they had been studying many species across what they called the habitable sectors. She learned they had a hierarchy based on size and age. She learned they required less rest than humans. She learned they were sensitive to certain sounds and had trouble seeing in red light. After Jiwoo completed a particularly difficult simulation involving crossing a chasm using only the materials provided, she was returned to her cell exhausted but satisfied. She had beaten their test again. As she sat recovering, she noticed the smaller alien watching her from beyond the cell wall. Its skin rippled with patterns of blue and green that Jiwoo had come to recognize as curiosity. "You are different," the alien's voice formed in her mind. The others struggle, but you adapt. Jiwoo considered whether to respond. This was the first time one of them had directly addressed her outside of test instructions. "Humans are good at adapting," she finally said, looking directly at the alien. "It's how we've survived." The alien's skin flashed with surprise. It hadn't expected her to speak back. After a moment, its patterns shifted to what Ju thought might be interest. "I am Nabi," the alien said. "I study how species learn." Ju nodded slowly. "And what have you learned about humans?" Nabi's skin rippled. "That we have much more to learn." As the alien moved away, Ju allowed herself a small smile. Yes, they certainly did. And she would make sure that lesson was one they wouldn't forget. The lights in the cell block dimmed to a soft blue glow, signaling what Ju had come to recognize as the night cycle. Most of the aliens left the observation area, leaving only automated systems running. The prisoners were expected to sleep. Ju sat with her back against the wall, eyes closed but mind alert. She had been counting the steps between testing rooms, memorizing the faces and ranks of her captors, and testing the limits of her cell. Every bit of information was a potential weapon. A soft movement caught her attention. When she opened her eyes, she saw the smaller alien, the one that always watched her tests with special interest, standing alone before her cell. "You understand our speech now," the alien said. The words formed directly in Juwoo's mind, not a question but a simple statement of fact. Juwoo hesitated, then nodded cautiously. There was no point denying it. The alien's skin shifted from its usual blue-green to a gentler pattern of swirling azure. "Your species interests me," it continued. "The others believe you are simple creatures, but I have observed differently." "Who are you?" Ju asked, speaking out loud for the first time to one of her captors. "I am called Nabi. I am a junior researcher in xenobiology." "And what do you want with me, Nabi?" The alien's skin rippled in what Ju had started to recognize as their version of thoughtfulness. "Knowledge. Understanding. You are unexpected." This began a strange relationship. Over the next several night cycles, Nabi would return when the others had gone. Sometimes they would talk for only a few minutes, other times for what felt like hours. Ju was careful, revealing little about herself while gathering every scrap of information Nabi offered. "Your people call themselves the Wonjin?" Ju asked during their third meeting. "Yes, we come from a world with 3 suns. We evolved to become the dominant species. And now you travel the stars capturing other species for study." Nabi's skin darkened slightly. "We are scientists. We catalog life across the galaxy. We have been doing this for thousands of your Earth years. Do you always lock up the life you catalog?" Ju kept her voice neutral despite her anger. "Lesser beings must be contained for proper study." "Lesser beings?" Ju raised an eyebrow. "Those who have not achieved full sentience or technological mastery," Nabi explained, as if it were obvious. "The Wanjin reached the stars when your kind were still using stone tools. We have mastered energy, matter, and time itself. We are the pinnacle of evolution." Ju listened carefully to the pride in Nabi's mental voice. Pride was a weakness she could use. "How many humans have you taken?" she asked during their next meeting. Nabi's skin rippled with blue patterns. What Ju had learned indicated discomfort or uncertainty. There was a long pause before the answer came. "You are the 7th group. The others did not survive the advanced testing phases." Ju felt rage building inside her chest. 6 groups before them. How many people was that? 20, 30. All dead from these tests. She kept her face calm with military discipline, but her hands curled into fists. "What happened to them?" she asked quietly. "Their bodies failed under stress. Their minds broke under simulation. They were disappointing specimens." Nabi's skin patterns shifted rapidly. "But your group is different. You especially show remarkable adaptation." Ju nodded slowly, filing this information away. The Wonjin had been taking humans for some time. They had killed her people through their experiments, and they considered it nothing more than scientific data. During the day cycles, Juwu continued to observe everything around her. She noticed how the Wanjin winced when her voice hit certain high notes during a frustration test. She saw how their movements slowed and became less coordinated when emergency red lights activated during a system malfunction. These were weaknesses, and Juwu was collecting them all. "Why do you help me understand?" Juwu asked Nabi during one of their nighttime conversations. "Won't you get in trouble with the others?" "I am a junior researcher. My specialization is behavioral adaptation." Nabi paused, skin swirling with complex patterns. "But I question our methods. No species we've studied has shown such rapid learning curves. It makes me wonder what else we've miscalculated." "What do you mean?" "The senior researchers believe all non-Wanjin species follow predictable patterns. But you humans, you defy our models. You solve problems in ways we don't anticipate. You endure beyond what your physical forms should allow." Nabi moved closer to the cell wall. "It suggests our understanding of intelligence may be incomplete." Juwu smiled slightly. "That's a dangerous thought for someone who believes they're the pinnacle of evolution." "Yes," Nabi agreed, skin now pulsing with slow waves of purple, a pattern Juwu hadn't seen before. "It is." During the following day's tests, Juwu was placed in a simulation of what appeared to be an Earth city. But instead of the usual survival or problem-solving challenges, she found herself in what seemed to be a museum. Displays showed various artifacts from Earth, some accurately represented, others bizarrely wrong. As she examined a display case containing what was labeled as human communication devices, but included both a smartphone and a decorative vase, Juwu realized something important. The Wanjin's knowledge of Earth was incomplete and often incorrect. They had been observing from a distance, making assumptions, collecting random samples. They didn't understand humans at all. That night, when she returned to her cell, Juwu noticed something new. The cell wall facing Captain Han's enclosure flickered slightly every 40 seconds. It was barely noticeable, but her trained eyes caught the pattern. A system flaw or regular maintenance cycle, perhaps. When the night cycle began and most Wanjin left, Juwu waited for Nabi. But tonight, the junior researcher didn't come. Instead, Juwu used the opportunity to test her theory about the cell walls. She moved to the edge of her cell closest to Captain Han and waited for the flicker. When it came, she tapped quickly on the wall. 3 short taps, 2 long ones, 3 short again. An old military code they had both trained with. She waited, heart pounding. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then, faintly, came the response. 2 long taps, 1 short, 2 long. Captain Han's call sign. Juwu almost laughed with joy. They could communicate. During the brief moments when the containment field reset, sound could travel between cells. The Wanjin, for all their advanced technology, had created a system with a flaw. When the next flicker came, Juwu quickly tapped out, "Others." The response came 40 seconds later. "Yes, all 8 OER." Another reset, "Pilan." And Han's reply, "Wo RKing. Gather NFO." By the time Nabi returned the following night, Juwu had established basic communication with her entire team. Captain Han had confirmed everyone was physically unharmed. Minho had discovered his own cell had a similar reset pattern, but on a different timing. Do-Yun had noticed the Wanjin never entered the cell block during the 3rd hour of the night cycle, perhaps a required rest period. Subin had been mapping the guard rotations. Each small piece of information was a building block toward freedom. "Your tests are changing," Juwu said to Nabi when the alien appeared. "Yesterday wasn't about survival or problem solving. It was about human culture." "Yes," Nabi agreed. "I designed that test myself. I wanted to see how you reacted to our understanding of your species." "Your understanding has gaps," Juwu said carefully. "Yes, that is what makes you interesting. There is much we don't know about humans." Nabi's skin rippled with those curious purple waves again. "Perhaps that is why the senior researchers are eager to reach your planet. Juwu felt her blood run cold. Reach my planet. You mean Earth? Yes. This vessel changes course tomorrow. We are to establish a permanent research outpost on Earth. Many more humans will be studied there. As Nabi continued explaining their plans, Juwu's mind raced. The stakes had just gotten much higher. This wasn't just about saving herself and her team anymore. It was about saving Earth. Juwu waited until the surveillance system cycled to its reset point. She had timed it precisely. 4 seconds of dead space every 8 minutes. Not long, but enough. She moved to the corner of her cell where the cameras had a small blind spot. The next reset came, and she quickly tapped her message to the others. "They're taking us to Earth," she whispered, knowing the sound would carry to the adjacent cells during the system pause. Captain Han's response came during the next cycle. "How do you know?" "Nabi told me. They're establishing a permanent research facility. We're the advanced test subjects." Over the next 3 days, each team member shared what they had learned during their testing sessions. Their messages were brief, limited by the short windows of communication, but critical. Minho had made an important discovery. Energy fields fluctuate during transfers. 3-second weakness when they move us. Doyun had been carefully memorizing the ship's layout. Main control room 20 paces north of testing chamber 4. 6 guards always present. Subin's contribution was unexpected but valuable. Found sound that hurts them. Hygiene note held for 5 seconds makes them cover their ear holes. Piece by piece, a plan began to form in Juwu's mind, but they needed more: inside help, access to systems, and perfect timing. During her next test, Juwu was placed in a simulation of an Earth ocean. She had to survive rising water levels while solving mathematical equations that controlled floodgates. As always, she completed the challenge faster than the Wonjin expected. When she returned to her cell, soaking wet but successful, Nabi was waiting. "Your adaptation to aquatic challenges exceeds all models," the young researcher said, skin flickering with blue-green patterns of excitement. Juwu sat down, looking tired but satisfied. "Water is important on Earth. Most humans learn to swim as children." "Fascinating. The senior researchers believed your species evolved primarily for land environments." "We did, but we adapt." Juwu paused, then looked directly at Nabi. "I need to ask you something." The alien's skin rippled with curiosity. "What do you wish to know?" "I need access to the environmental controls on this ship. Can you help me?" Nabi's skin immediately darkened to deep purple, alarm or suspicion. "Why would I help you escape?" Juwu laughed softly. "I'm not planning to escape. How could I? I'm surrounded by Wonjin on a ship in space." She leaned forward. "I want to understand how your life support works. It fascinates me how you maintain perfect conditions for so many different test environments." The alien studied her for a long moment. Juwu kept her expression open, interested, non-threatening. Finally, Nabi's skin lightened slightly. "The secondary environmental controls are adjacent to Laboratory 7, where you'll be tested tomorrow. They regulate atmospheric composition and lighting cycles." Juwu nodded, careful not to show too much interest. "Thank you. Learning about your technology helps me understand your species better." "Is that important to you? Understanding us?" "Of course. You're studying me. Why shouldn't I study you in return?" This seemed to please Nabi, whose skin rippled with gentle waves of green. Juwu decided to push a little further. "One more thing. What happens if your people continue taking humans after your research facility is established on Earth?" "Standard protocol," Nabi answered matter-of-factly. "Study until we understand all biological aspects, then establish control parameters for the species." "Control parameters." Juwu kept her voice neutral despite the chill running down her spine. "Habitat restrictions, population management, integration into the catalog of known species. And if the species resists..." Nabi's skin darkened to almost black. "Resistance is cataloged, then eliminated." The words hung in the air between them. Ju nodded slowly, as if considering this scientific information rather than a threat to her entire planet. I see. Thank you for explaining. After Nabi left, Ju sat perfectly still in her cell, processing what she had learned. The Wonjin didn't just want to study humans. They planned to control them, to put Earth under their management. And if humans fought back, they would be eliminated. The stakes couldn't be higher. That night, during the surveillance cycles, Ju shared everything with her team. They had one chance to act, and it would have to be during tomorrow's testing session. We move tomorrow. She tapped to Captain Han. Laboratory 7. Environmental controls. Risks, came his reply. Total. But Earth in danger if we fail. There was a pause before Han's response. Understood. Team ready. Ju spent the rest of the night going over every detail of their plan. Each team member had a critical role. Timing would be everything. Morning came, signaled by the brightening lights in the cell block. Ju stood ready as the Wonjin guards approached her cell. Today 3 guards came instead of the usual 2. Perhaps they sensed something was different. The cell wall disappeared, and Ju stepped out calmly. She saw the others being collected from their cells as well. This was unusual. Typically, they were tested individually. Ju caught Captain Han's eye briefly. He gave her the smallest nod. This change in routine could work in their favor. All 5 of them together would have a better chance. The guards led them through the now familiar corridors of the ship. Left, right, straight for 50 paces, then right again. Ju counted every step, matching them to her mental map of the vessel. They entered a large laboratory she hadn't seen before. Unlike the previous testing chambers, this one contained multiple stations with what looked like medical equipment. In the center was a large circular platform surrounded by floating screens covered in Wonjin symbols. 5 senior researchers waited for them, including the lead scientist whose skin always displayed complex patterns of deep purple and blue. Nabi stood slightly apart from the others, skin flickering with what Ju now recognized as nervous energy. Today we begin final physiological assessment, announced the lead researcher, his thoughts projecting strongly into all their minds. Your species has shown unexpected potential. We must understand your biological limits before reaching your homeworld. Ju glanced around quickly. There, a small door to the left of the main entrance. According to Nabi, that would lead to the environmental control panel. Now she just needed a distraction. As if reading her thoughts, Subin suddenly doubled over, clutching his stomach and groaning loudly. The specimen appears to be malfunctioning, one researcher noted, moving closer to examine him. While attention focused on Subin, Ju made eye contact with Minho, who stood nearest to one of the floating devices. He nodded slightly. Subin's groans grew louder, and then he did something none of the Wonjin expected. He began to sing. A clear, high G note that he held perfectly, just as he had discovered during his testing. The effect was immediate. The Wonjin flinched, their skin flaring bright colors of distress. Their movements became uncoordinated as they tried to cover the small openings on the sides of their heads that served as ears. In that moment of confusion, Juwoo's team moved as one. Captain Han tackled the nearest guard. Do-hyun grabbed a floating device and smashed it into another. Minho ran for the main door, securing it closed. Juwoo sprinted for the side door, slipping through as the chaos erupted behind her. Just as Nabi had said, a control panel waited in the small adjacent room. The symbols were alien, but Juwoo had been studying Wonjin technology for days now. She quickly located the atmospheric controls and the lighting systems. With quick movements, she adjusted both, increasing the red light spectrum throughout the ship and changing the oxygen mix to a level that would make the Wonjin sluggish but wouldn't harm humans. As she worked, the door slid open behind her. Juwoo spun around, ready to fight, only to find Nabi standing there. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Nabi's skin displayed a pattern Juwoo had never seen before, ripples of both dark purple and bright blue, mixing and shifting rapidly. "You lied to me," Nabi said finally. Yes, Juwu admitted. You were going to enslave my people. I was going to study them, and then control them, and then eliminate them if they resisted. Nabi's skin darkened. That is our way. It ends today, Juwu said firmly. Either help me or stop me, but know that humans will never submit to being specimens in your catalog. Nabi seemed to struggle internally, skin flashing between colors. Then, slowly, the alien moved toward the control panel. These settings will disorient the senior researchers but not cause permanent harm, Nabi said, adjusting Juwu's changes slightly. And this will give you access to the communication systems. Juwu stared at the alien in surprise. Why are you helping me? Because, Nabi said, skin now settling into a steady blue pattern. You have taught me that the Wanjin may not be the pinnacle of evolution after all. The day finally came. Juwu and her team were being moved together to a new testing chamber. This was the chance they had been waiting for. 6 Wanjin guards surrounded them as they walked through the long corridors of the alien ship. Juwu caught Minho's eye across the group and gave a tiny nod. It was time. Minho began to hum softly. At first, it sounded like a normal tune. Then he slowly raised the pitch higher and higher, until it reached the special frequency they had discovered during their tests. The Wanjin guards began to twitch and shift uncomfortably, their skin flashing with patterns of distress. At the same moment, Subin grabbed his stomach and fell to the floor with a groan. Pain. Something's wrong, he cried out. 2 of the guards moved toward him, their attention drawn away from the others. Dodian used this moment to slide closer to the junction in the corridor, where they knew the environmental controls were located. Captain Han casually stepped nearer to the lead guard, his movements slow and non-threatening. They reached the exact spot Nabi had described to Juwu, the junction where the environmental control panel was hidden behind a section of wall. This was their one chance. Now, Juwu shouted. Everything happened at once. Subin, who had been pretending to be sick, suddenly sat up straight and let out a piercing whistle that hit the perfect note to disrupt Wanjin hearing. The guards clutched at the sides of their heads, their skin flashing bright colors of pain. Captain Han moved with lightning speed, grabbing the weapon-like device from the lead guard's belt. Do-hyun did the same with another guard. The devices weren't exactly guns, but they controlled the energy fields the Wanjin used to subdue prisoners. Juwu broke away from her guards and ran to the wall panel. Her fingers found the hidden seam just where Nabi had described it. The panel slid open to reveal a complex array of controls. Juwu didn't hesitate. She pressed the sequence Nabi had taught her. Immediately, the normal lights went out. Red emergency lighting flooded the corridors instead. The Wanjin guards seemed to become confused, their movements slow and clumsy. Juwu had learned during their tests that Wanjin couldn't see well in red light. Humans, however, could. This way, Juwu commanded, pointing down the corridor that would lead them to the command center of the ship. Stay together. The 5 humans ran through the red-lit corridors, using everything they had learned about the Wanjin against them. When guards appeared, Subin would hit them with his special whistle. When doors wouldn't open, Minho used the knowledge he had gained from watching the aliens operate their systems. They fought their way through the ship, level by level. It wasn't easy. Some Wanjin had protective gear that blocked the sounds. Others used weapons that fired energy pulses. Captain Han took a hit to his shoulder that left his arm numb, but he kept moving. Finally, they reached the bridge, the command center of the entire ship. The doors slid open to reveal a large circular room with viewing screens showing the stars outside. And standing in the center was Navi. You knew, Juwu said, raising the energy device she had taken from a guard. Nabi's skin rippled with complex patterns. I calculated the probability of your attempt. Your species is more dangerous than we understood. The alien's colors shifted to blue. The commander and senior researchers have entered hibernation for the final approach to your world. Wake them, Juwu ordered, keeping the weapon steady. Why would I help you further? Nabi asked. Because you already helped us this far, Ju replied. You're different from the others. You see us as more than specimens. Nabi seemed to consider this, skin shifting through colors. Finally, the alien moved to a control panel and pressed a sequence of symbols. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a chamber where several large wonjin floated in a clear liquid. One by one, they began to move, their colors becoming brighter as they woke from hibernation. The largest one, the commander Ju had seen supervising her tests, emerged first. Its skin flashed angry patterns of red and black when it saw the humans standing on the bridge with weapons. What is the meaning of this? The commander's thoughts boomed in their minds. Instead of answering directly, Ju moved to the control panel where Nabi had shown her how to access the ship's data systems. With a few quick movements, she brought up recordings of their tests onto the main viewing screen. Look, she said to the commander. Look at how your scientists predicted humans would fail these tests, and look at how we actually performed. The screen showed side-by-side comparisons, wonjin predictions about human limitations next to the actual results that far exceeded those predictions. You thought we were simple animals, Ju continued. But we learned your language, your technology, your weaknesses. We turned your tests against you. The commander's skin darkened with anger. This changes nothing. You are still primitive beings. Your planet will still become a research outpost. Ju smiled coldly. No, it won't. She turned to Nabi. Show them what we did to the engine systems. Nabi hesitated, then changed the display. Now the screen showed the ship's power core with new connections rigged to it. Connections that Minho had created based on what he'd learned during his testing. We've linked your power core to the main computer, Ju explained. If I enter a simple command, this entire ship will be destroyed. She looked directly at the commander. You will transmit a message to your homeworld. You will tell them that Earth is protected, that humans are not to be studied or approached ever again. Why would we comply with this demand? The commander asked. Because you have two choices, Ju replied. Either your people learn from your mistake today, or none of us leave this ship alive. I would rather die here than let you take Earth. The other humans nodded in agreement. They stood together, united in their resolve. For a long moment, the commander's skin shifted through patterns of dark colors as it considered the situation. Finally, it moved to the communication panel. What message do you want sent? It asked. Hours later, it was done. The Wonjin homeworld had received detailed information about humans, not as research specimens, but as a species to be respected and avoided. The ship was now approaching Earth, no longer as invaders but under human control. Ju stood at the viewing portal, watching as the blue planet grew larger in the distance, her home. Safe, at least for now. Nabi came to stand beside her, the alien skin now a calm blue. What will your people do with our technology? Nabi asked. Prepare, Ju answered simply. Your people aren't the only ones out there in space, are they? No, Nabi admitted. There are worse things among the stars than the Wonjin. Ju nodded. Then we'll be ready for them too. As the ship began its descent toward Earth, Ju thought about how quickly everything had changed. The Wonjin had captured her team thinking they were collecting simple specimens for study. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant. Captain Han joined her at the window. Mission accomplished, Staff Sergeant, he said with a tired smile, though not exactly the mission we were assigned. No, Ju agreed. This was much more important. She looked back at the stars one last time before the ship entered Earth's atmosphere. Out there were other aliens, other threats, but they would learn what the Wonjin had learned today. Humans were not to be underestimated.